Well, all right, welcome to Doxadeo Church again. My name's Chris. If I've not had the pleasure of meeting you at some point, I'd love to do that, to make introductions. And as Patrick said, every week I get to meet new people that are first service, second service. And so if that's you today, I'd love at some point to meet you. And I just want to say Patrick, that was just up here, had a special day yesterday. Patrick turned 40. Is that not the youngest looking 40-year-old you've ever seen? So I love that guy. I love his heart. Most of you know this, but if you don't, if you're new around here, Patrick leads an organization called Renown Collective that puts clean water in spaces and places in the world that don't have it. If you don't know this, the number one cause of death in our world is lack of access to clean drinking water. Isn't that crazy? Like, we don't have any context for that or reality of that in the spaces and places we live, but he's committed his life to making sure that every child, every family, every village has access to clean drinking water. So on his birthday, I thought this was cool. He said, don't give me gifts, just support the work that's happening. And so I love that guy. Happy 40th, Patrick, to you. And also, I had last week, just so you know, I had the flu. And so the flu is gone, but I have this nice, sexy, smoking voice that is still remaining. So if I've got a little extra octave in my voice, or you hear my voice come in and out today, that is why. But we're glad you guys are part of today. We're actually starting a brand new series, as you heard him mention, called Welcome Home. And the idea behind this is our home, your heart. And what we're going to be talking about, we've never actually done this, but we're going to take a series and go straight through December and then track over to the new year and do this also in January. And the whole idea around this is we want to talk about things that are true of our church home or our church family that we hope are or will be true of your heart and eventually your individual homes. And so as we head towards the close of this year, which is rapidly approaching, we're rapidly approaching 2023. Just let that sink in for a second. 2023, it just sounds weird to say it out loud, doesn't it? For you old schoolers in the room, Marty McFly was, when he went to Back to the Future and Back to Future 2, that was 8 years. 2023 is 8 years ahead of where he went. So you're literally living in the future. So just let that set. Whatever you need to do that. Some of you kids, you've never seen that movie. You just need to go watch it. It's going to change your life. I promise. That and Jesus. But we're heading towards 2023, and one of the things that we want to do, like as I think about the next year, one of the things that's really just a burden and passion in my heart is we want to make sure that we welcome our entire community to see this place, see this group of people, this family as their home. We want it to be a welcoming place. Now, I said this in first service. It was fascinating. When I talk about the church as a house or a home or as a family, for some of you, that's just old school. That's all you've ever known it as. That's all you've ever experienced the church as. When I say church home, church family, you just go back to your childhood and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Others of you, and I know because I've been doing this for 25 years and I've had people say it through the years, for some of you, when I talk about the church as a family or the church as a home, say, hey, is that your church home? People go, what does that even mean? So I'm curious in this room. It was about 50-50 in the first service. How many of you grew up in a church context or you grew up understanding the church as a home or a family? How many of you? I'm just curious. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Some of you did, some of you did not. So if you did not grow up hearing the church as some of you are like, it was a real dysfunctional church home, I'll just tell you that. If you didn't grow up with that as your context and you're wondering why is it that we talk about the church as a home or a family, it actually comes right off the pages of Scripture. This was one of Jesus, one of the references or the metaphors that he used the most for the church. Paul, all throughout the letters that he wrote, referred to the church as a household or as a family or a home. In fact, I won't go through many of them. I just want to go through show you one verse where Paul was talking to the church at Ephesus, which a lot of times these were house churches that were small churches started with new believers. They had come to this realization that Jesus was who he said. They wanted to tell others. They wanted to grow together. Paul wrote a letter to the churches at Ephesus, and this is one of the things that he said to them. He said, you are no longer strangers and aliens, meaning foreigners, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and the members. And look at how he describes it, talking to the church, to the household of God. This language is all throughout the New Testament. Jesus often talked about the church or Christians as brothers and sisters, father and mother. It was all these family dynamics and family contexts. Paul often referred to the idea of a household of God or the household of believers. And so the idea was this: the early church, and this is supposed to be true of the modern church, was supposed to, and they did act like a family. They cared for one another. They celebrated in the highs. They walked with each other in the valleys. They helped each other navigate the journey together. There were some, it said that those that had seasoned in life, they had experienced some things, whether it was in life or relationships or work, they were to come alongside the younger ones and help them understand both how to do things the right way and not do things the wrong way. It was a family. And that was the dynamic and the context of the early church. And so you're going to hear us, if you're around here any length of time, you're going to hear us talk about the church as a family. In fact, we say this: we're not just a family, we want to be a family on mission, because we believe there's something that God has called his family as the church to do. So in this series, we're going to talk about this idea of welcome home. And here's what I hope. I hope as we talk about these ideas and these things that are, and we want to be true here of the church, that they find their way in their rhythm into your personal lives, because our church will never be greater than the individual households and individuals that make up our church, because the church isn't buildings, it's people. And so that's what we're talking about in this series. So I want to start with this. For the next 2 weeks, I want to talk about this phrase that is our dream. We have a dream to reach lost sons and daughters and equip them to become city changers. Sounds good on paper, but what does that really mean? So today, I want to talk about the first half of this, the idea that we want to reach lost sons and daughters. I'm going to talk about what that means, what God means, what Jesus means when he talks about the lost. And then next week, I want to come back and talk about this second half of equipping people to become city changers and what that means, what it looks like in practical ways, and what the scripture has to say about that. So I want to look today at a verse that was penned by Luke. Those of you that know the scriptures well, you know Luke. Luke was a doctor. He was also a historian. Some of you don't know his story. He was an eyewitness, a contemporary with Jesus. He walked with Jesus, talked with Jesus, interacted. Many of the things that you find in the Gospel of Luke, the story of Luke, were things that Luke saw with his own eyes, the encounters with Jesus. So one of two things is happening when you read Luke. He either saw it, he experienced it himself, or he interviewed someone who was an eyewitness of these events, and then he wrote it down. So one of those two things is happening with the verse that I'm going to read you today. And I want to tell you this. The verse that I'm going to read is one of the most famous verses in the scripture, but it comes out of one of the most famous stories in the scripture. I want to start at the end, and then I want to work my way back to the beginning. This story is going to be a story that most of you know, or at least you've heard of somewhere along the way. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you've probably heard of it. And I'll prove that to you at the end of the message. But this is where it starts. I'll start at the end, work back to the beginning. In Luke chapter 19, verse 10, this is what Luke says. He says, "For the Son of Man," that's talking about Jesus, a reference to Jesus, "the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Jesus said, all right, here's my primary thing. Here's my purpose. You don't have to wonder what I'm here for. You don't have to wonder what my agenda is. I'm just going to tell you, this is my primary agenda. This is the reason that I came. Everything that I'm doing is culminating in this. Jesus was God in human flesh, something that I still, after all these years, can't wrap my mind around, but it was true. Jesus was God in human flesh. And he said, hey, I have come to earth. This is the Christmas story. I have come to earth. He said, Emmanuel was God with us. I've come to earth, and this is it, guys. All of it, everything that you see, everything you experience, everything you read in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all the gospel accounts, everything is about this one thing. My purpose is to seek and save the lost. But the question is, what does that mean? So I want to spend the rest of our time talking about that little word lost, and not just our definition of it, but what Jesus actually meant when he said lost. So let me start with a little crowd participation. You can engage, or you can just judge the person sitting next to you, however you'd like to handle this. Have any of you ever been lost? Some of you are pointing at someone else that you're going to pray for later. Some of us are more directionally challenged than others. Can we just say that, right? All the women in the room pointed at all the men in the room, and all the men are like, I'm not directionally challenged. There was that one time that I drove past that same gas station 3 times in 45 minutes, but I wasn't lost. I was just taking the scenic route, right? I wasn't really lost, but some of us can acknowledge that we've been lost a few times. Have you ever been like on a college or a high school campus and you just get lost. Like you're walking down a hallway and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I've never been on this hallway before and I don't have a class on this hallway. Or did any of you have this happen in college? Maybe you're in college and this happened. You went to that first day of that freshman class and it's a huge class. About 5 minutes into the class, you realize, I'm not in this class. Like this is not a part of what I'm doing. And at that moment, you have two options. You can either get up and take the walk of shame and leave, or you can just sit through the class and just pretend that you were actually in that class. You can talk to each other after service and tell people what you actually did. Have you ever been lost at work? Like, first day, maybe it's a corporate office. You go in and all the rooms look the same, and you end up in a boardroom that you're not supposed to be in, or you go in the wrong bathroom, something's not labeled right. You ever lost your kids? Just temporarily, right? You found them again. You ever left your kids somewhere in a grocery store or perhaps a church? You'd be amazed through the years how many times people left their kids at church. Like, they usually come back. That's the good news. They usually come back and get them. But so many times I've been in the foyer and there's a kid here and I'm like, where are their family? Like, I don't know. I think they're at Qdoba. Like, I don't know what's happening. Our kids' environments are good, but they're not that good. Sometimes people forget and they lose things. So we've lost our kids a few times along the way. But fortunately, we have found them at some point along the way again. But it's just a reality of life. Sometimes you just get lost, and maybe it's temporary, and maybe it's not, maybe it's a bigger issue. But for me, it's a regular occurrence. My wife will tell you this. I can have Siri full volume. She yells at me. I'm just telling you. I don't know if she yells at you. She yells at me full volume, telling me where to turn, when to turn, and I still miss my turn. And then I get frustrated. I'm like, why didn't she tell me? And my wife's like, she told you like 4 times that you're supposed to turn. So in my life, I've been lost many times. One time in particular, I want to share the story with you this morning. Now, some of you may have, along the way, heard me share this particular story before. Actually, a year and a half, or maybe it's 2 years ago, I'm not sure. I shared this. We had a campus in Rock Hill, and I shared this there. So if you've heard this story before, track with me. But one time when my son was really little, he's 23 years old now. When he was really little, I wanted to go back to my roots. And I wanted for him to experience and journey on some of the things that I experienced as a kid. I grew up in a very rural setting, not Charlotte, North Carolina. I love Charlotte. I think it's the greatest city ever. But I didn't grow up here. I grew up, like I say, rural North Georgia. And so hunting and fishing and land. And my parents had a decent amount of land, but there was hundreds and hundreds of acres that backed up to the land that they owned. And that was just our playground. So I grew up in the day before there was helicopter parenting. Like, my mom would just send us into the woods, like no cell phone. We didn't have those. Like, we were still rotary phone back in the day. Send us into the woods, and when it was time, like, we would play all day, and when it was time to come home for lunch, she would honk the car horn hundreds of yards away to let us know it was time to come home. Like, that was it. So there was no bodyguards. There was no purified water. There was no tracking device. It was just us and the woods. And I wanted my kid to experience this. I'm not sure my kid wanted to experience this, but that's not the point. It wasn't really about him. It was about me. So I said, hey, Braden, I want to take you on this little trip, planned a day trip back to Georgia. We're going to track down this little creek that I knew as a kid. And I remembered as a kid it dumping into a wider creek that felt like it was a river. Now, and I wanted to see, like, is it really a river, or is that just how I remembered it as a kid? And so we planned this thing out. I did actually take some water. I didn't take much else. Tackle box, fishing pole. We fished in the creek. Caught some fish. It was a great time. If you ask me, if you ask Braden, maybe not. We had a great time. It was one of those just massively, ridiculously hot days in Georgia. And so about 30, 45 minutes into it, Braden was already starting to fade with a little trip down memory lane. And I'm like, hey, I want to walk down this creek a little further and see where it dumps into the bigger creek. So we kept going. He kept getting increasingly more dislocated from the experience, shall we say, ready for the air conditioning. And I walked too far. But I'll just say I looked up at one point, and I had this terrible realization. I looked around and I thought, I don't recognize anything. Now, I have no idea where I am. I'm a grown man. How am I lost in the woods that I grew up in? And I had this flash, like this moment of like, have you ever seen one of those news specials where like some Boy Scout troop got lost in Yellowstone or some hiking trip, and then all of a sudden, like 3 days later, they got airlifted out and they lived on granola and grass or something or tree bark, and they survived. And I had this vision. I'm like, that's me. I'm going to have to get airlifted out. It's going to be me and my son. We're going to be on the news, and I'm never going to live it down because it happened in my backyard. So that's what's going through my mind, and I'm like, I got to get out of this. And so I started tracking back down the creek. About 45 minutes, I finally find a fork in the creek that I do not remember as a child. I had jumped to the other side of the creek, and when that fork happened, I never saw it. And I had just followed this thing in the middle of nowhere. I can't tell you how, here I was as a grown man, I can't tell you how excited I was when I found that fork in the creek. I'm like, that's it. I'm going to make it back home. I'm like, I may tell this story one day, but today it's just embarrassing. So I was lost. And as I look back on this, there are two things that just stand out that are so interesting to me. So again, I mentioned about a year and a half ago, I don't remember when it was, I was going to share this story with our church and our location in Rock Hill. And so I was telling my son about it. And I said, hey, you remember that time I took you on the trip and we got lost? And he said, I remember the story. He said, I remember all that happening. He said, but Dad, I didn't know we were lost. I'm like, well, good for you. I was panicking. Like, what had happened is I had insulated my son from the reality. Like, I had enough panic going on. I had enough embarrassment going on for the both of us. I had insulated him from the reality. And I said, you literally had no idea. He said, not until this very moment. I did not know that we were lost the whole time. I think that's fascinating. The second thing that is really interesting is the moment that I discovered that I was lost was not the moment I was actually lost. Like the moment that I looked up and said, uh-oh, I don't recognize anything, that was a profound moment that I remember, but that was not the actual moment that I was lost. I had been lost for a really long time by the time I realized it. And here's what I would say, and this is what I submit to you. I think both of those two things that were true of that story are true of our lives many times when it comes to our spiritual lives and the way we interact with God, religion, spirituality, whatever it is. I think many times we're lost and we don't even know it. And I think there are times where the moment that something starts to well up in us that tells us something's off or there's something missing or perhaps we're a little bit off rhythm or out of balance by the time, and maybe we won't use the word lost, but something's just not right. I don't know my purpose. I don't know where I'm headed. By the time we realize it or the moment we realize it is not the moment we lost. It had happened long before that. Maybe it's when you're a high school senior and you realize, oh, it's either like college or I got to go get a job. And you start to think about, man, what do I want to do with my life? Maybe it's when you're a college senior and you're about to be adulting for real. You start to think about, man, what am I going to do? What's next? Maybe it's when you're hitting your 40s. Congratulations, Patrick. When you're hitting your 50s. And you just have a moment. I bet some of you have experienced this. You have a moment along the way where you just kind of look around and the job is not doing the same thing for you that it used to. Maybe the relationship is not doing the same thing for you that it used to. You just have an unsettled feeling. Like, I don't know if this is the career for me. I don't know if this is the person for me. I don't know if this is the reality for me. I've seen this happen with people in their faith. I don't know if my childhood faith is the thing for me, and they begin to deconstruct and pull away from faith. Maybe there's been a moment somewhere along the way. And here's what is true. Those are the moments, and again, maybe you wouldn't say I'm lost, but that's what you're describing. That I'm in some way a purpose or passion or belong, like feeling like I somehow belong or make a difference in this world. I'm a little bit lost. You wouldn't use that word, but that's the reality. But the moment that you're recognizing it, senior in high school, college, 40s, 50s, whatever it is not the moment it actually happened. It probably had happened long before, perhaps even at birth. That there had been something that was missing, something that was out of sorts. And so I want you to take this story of me, my son getting lost in the woods. I don't want you to keep that as the backdrop. And I want to come back to this thing that Jesus said that's so profound. I want you to keep that image in your mind as you think about what Jesus said, that for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Imagine his audience. Like there are times that we don't know sometimes Jesus' audience. A lot of times he had just his closest followers. Sometimes he had thousands of people gathered on a hillside. But typically when he was teaching, there was some kind of audience. Just imagine there's a few people gathered around. Jesus says this thing, I've come to seek and save the lost. And have you ever been in a presentation where somebody said something and then they kind of looked at you like it's like they're talking to you? Imagine that Jesus did this. I've came to seek and save the lost. I've come to seek and save the lost. And then he's like, looks over, he's like, Sam? You, John, because those are very Jewish names. I'm sure that's what Jesus said. Like, imagine it. If that was the case, isn't it true that that'd feel a little offensive? Like, to acknowledge someone's lostness, like, wait a second, what do you mean? Like, spiritually, religion? Like, what do you mean I'm lost? If you said this to your neighbor, like, try this when you get home. Go to your neighbor, just say, I just want you to know, I've been watching. I see how, many times you don't take your trash all the way out. And I just think maybe in some areas of life you're a little bit lost. Maybe spiritually you're a little bit lost. I don't know. It'd be offensive, right? I think may feel like a side note, but I think this is so important. Jesus followers, and I think the church, get this backwards so many times. Jesus was not standing at the Panthers game holding up a sign saying, hey, I want you guys to know, to a bunch of people that he didn't know, didn't have a relationship with, I want you to know you're lost, probably going to hell. I want you to know you're lost, probably going to hell. Hey, what was your name again? You're lost. It wasn't the context. And I think sometimes with well-intended hearts, we take really weird pathways to try and do the Jesus thing. But Jesus, in this passage of Scripture, was having a very specific conversation with a very specific human with whom he was wanted to develop a relationship. And out of that context, he began to talk about this reality of lostness. Now, the question, though, is this. What did Jesus mean? Not us, but what did Jesus mean when he said lost? So, that specific word, lost, that Jesus uses was used only 4 times in the New Testament. 1 time by Matthew, 3 times by Luke, one of which we're reading in this passage. And it's a unique combination of words. Now, some of you know this, and probably most of you know this, but the Bible wasn't written in English. Sometimes we think everything orients around us in the U.S. The Bible wasn't written in English. The original version of the New Testament was largely Greek with some Aramaic, and the Old Testament was largely Hebrew. And so when you translate that into English, what happens anytime you translate languages is there are some things that are lost in translations. Some words and phrases that make sense in one language don't make sense in another language. And this is one of those words that when you try to translate it into English, it gets a little bit lost in translation. I'll give you an example. It's not a perfect example, but I was talking to some friends of mine who their kids are in the 4Kids preschool, which is our preschool, and they had this little soccer clinic one day. And they were at their kids were at the soccer clinic. I saw them afterward at Collective Cafe, and I said, hey, how did it go? Did they love the soccer thing or whatever? She goes, well, first half of the day, not so good, but it went a little better at the end. I'm like, they didn't like the soccer thing? And she said, no. She goes, the problem was the instructor for the first half of the day, every time he said dribble the ball, my daughters picked up the ball and dribbled it like a basketball. They were a basketball family, not a soccer family. She said, so they kept getting in trouble. They said, no, you can't touch it with your hands. This is the reality. Same word means 2 wildly different things in 2 different sports. One sport, you almost never, you're supposed to never use your hands. The other one, you exclusively use your hands. And so sometimes when you translate things, they get lost in translation. So the Greek word here is the word apollos. Now, that's fun to say. You can take a picture and impress your friends with it. Most of them won't actually be impressed, but it comes from 2 Greek words. The first one is apo, that means away from. But the question is, away from what? The second part of this word is lolos, which is kind of like what it sounds like, loco or lolos. It's crazy. So when you put those 2 together, it means away from crazy, which is not helpful at all. Like unless you're talking about your family reunion, you're like, I don't know, this word fits pretty good. I want to get away from crazy, or the company business party, or some other thing in your life. But it's not super helpful for understanding what Jesus was trying to say, because he wasn't trying to say away from crazy. So what was he trying to say? Unfortunately, we have amazing context of the other 2 times that this verse was used. In the other 2 times that this verse was used, there was always in the context of a sheep and a shepherd. So in the scriptures, anytime you would see an analogy of sheep and shepherd, the sheep always represented people like us. The shepherd always represented God. So there's people and there was God. So in the context of a sheep and a shepherd, and you see this oftentimes in the scripture as you read through the scripture, oftentimes there were lost sheep, and the lost sheep were always sheep that were away from the shepherd. And by nature, when a sheep was away from the shepherd, sometimes the sheep didn't even know they were away from the shepherd. They didn't care. They were just doing their own thing. They didn't really need to know. But by nature, when a sheep was away from the shepherd, that sheep was usually in danger, because it was the shepherd that kept all of the prey, all of the wild animals away from them. And so that is the context of what Luke is talking about. So when you take that context and you look at what Jesus says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost, I would paraphrase it this way. This is exactly what he was saying. For the Son of Man, that's Jesus, came to find people who are away from God. This is everything Jesus was and is about. To find people who are away from God. Some of which know they're away from God. Others that may not know. If I could go back to the analogy of me and my son, sometimes the crazy thing about being lost is that sometimes you don't even know you're lost. Sometimes our world has insulated us from it. Because if you're honest, some of you here, it's going okay. Life is up and to the right. You've got 2 cars. You eat and live indoors. You've got a 401k. Maybe it's a 301k right now, but it'll be a 401k again at some point. You've got stuff. You go on vacations when you want to go on vacations. Your life is kind of insulated. You, like me with my son, I had insulated him from the reality. The reality was he was lost. He just didn't know it. The reality for us is sometimes, like the sheep and the shepherd, sometimes we're lost and we don't even know it. So I want you to remember, at the very beginning, I said that this verse, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost, came at the end of a really famous story, a story that most of you will know. It was a story of Zacchaeus. And as you know, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up for the Lord he wanted to. In our culture, we say it really like that. And then Jesus says, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm... Now, if you didn't grow up in church, this convinces you that we're a cult, right? That so many people could finish that little song. It's weird. It's politically incorrect. There's a lot of weird things, but we had good hearts. I think what we were trying to do was we were trying to take a song, put it to the scriptures so that we would remember the scriptures, and it worked. It's an incredible story, though. This statement that Jesus makes, his purpose statement, comes in the context of this story. Zacchaeus was not a good man. He was not a good man. He was away from God in every sense of the word. Morally, ethically, spiritually. If you were to say, Zacchaeus, do you have a relationship with God? You'd be like, no way. In every way, he cheated his fellow humans. He taxed them. Zacchaeus was, if God was here, Zacchaeus was here. If Jesus is here, Zacchaeus is here. But he's intrigued with Jesus. He's heard the stories. This is where it usually starts. Someone's intrigued or they're in need. He recognizes, perhaps, he's had a moment like me in the woods. They're like, oh, I think I'm lost. Something's not right. I'm not quite fulfilled. And so he's a short guy, so he climbs up into a tree and he's watching. He just wants a glimpse of Jesus. And Jesus sees him. This guy that is away from God in every sense of the word. And he says, Zacchaeus, I want you to come out of the tree. He said, I'm going to go to your house. Let's have a meal. It's so funny. I was thinking about this. When I was a kid, it said, I'm going to your house today. I used to think as a kid, it said, I'm going to your house Tuesday. Like I was thinking, I don't know why you're going to his house Tuesday, Jesus, but whatever. Like now as an adult, I realize he just said, I'm going to your house today. The reality, here's this guy who couldn't be more far from God. I don't even know if he's looking for God. He's just looking maybe perhaps for something to define reality or purpose or give something to his life that's not there. And Jesus says, I want you to come down and I want you to have a conversation that hopefully will lead to a relationship. And this is so profound. And I think we as Christians miss this. And I certainly think we as churches miss this. His journey to God did not start with believing the right things. It certainly didn't start with behaving. He was a terrible dude. He wasn't a better dude by the time he got out of the tree or got to the table with Jesus. His journey to God did not start with believing and did not start with behaving. It started with belonging. Jesus said, Zacchaeus, I know. Let's just have a meal. You and me. Let's talk. Let's foster a relationship. And he welcomed him and invited him to the table before he believed. And I think, again, so many times, guys, I confess this, I've gotten this wrong in my life. That I didn't think this way, but I expected people to behave in a certain way or believe a certain thing for them to be accepted in the family, in the church of God. And Jesus flips that paradigm around. He says, no. He says, we get it backwards. Here's the thing. Belonging is often the pathway to believing, not the other way around. Man, if we can ever welcome people to this table, invite people to be welcome in this home, and if we can invite people to be welcome in our homes who may not believe the same way we believe, who may not behave the same way that we behave, man, you might just see some amazing things transpire. One of the things that we say often here is that we want to be a church where people can belong before they believe. This is what we're talking about. It's not a bait and switch, though. Listen, if you're here, if you know someone, if someone listens to this later, I want you to hear this. We want you to believe. I believe Jesus is who he said, and it has changed everything about my life, fundamentally changed everything about my life. If you don't believe, I want you to. It's a better way of life. It's an eternal way of life. It gives purpose to your life when you understand who you are as a son or daughter of the living God. I want you to believe, but it's not a prerequisite for you to belong in the family of God. And it shouldn't be a prerequisite for you to belong in our homes and at our tables. We get this so twisted. We as Christians, if you're a follower of Jesus this morning, and I'm guessing most of you are, we got to invite people to our tables that don't believe like us, that don't look like us, that don't think like us, perhaps don't behave like us, or, vote like us. When you look at the narrative of Scripture, religious leaders built camps. Jesus followers built bridges. So which one are we? It's a beautiful thing, the way of Jesus. It's a messy thing, the way of Jesus. You say, and let me just tell you, the moment that you start to do this, you better just buckle up. Buckle your seatbelt. When Jesus did this, you need to be forewarned. The moment that Jesus began to act this way, the crowds condemned him. They said, there he goes again. Oh, you know how Jesus is. He's a friend of tax collectors, Zacchaeus, and sinners. You know how Jesus is. He's always hanging out with all the wrong people, doing all the wrong stuff. They condemned him. They mocked him. They said he had it all wrong. This was the reality of Jesus. I don't know why we would think it'd be any different than us. Listen, when you start to do this, when you invite people to your table that look nothing like you, believe nothing like you, think nothing like you, vote nothing like you, don't behave the way you have decided to behave in life, then people are going to be like, dude, you had so-and-so over to your house? Wait, they go to your church. Did you see what they posted? You know what they believe? Do you know what I saw on this issue that's being voted on? I saw what they said. I can't believe that you're friends with them. All the while, Jesus is saying, the very reason that I came is for them. Any them that in any way, in any season of their life, is away from God. He said, I came for them. That's the reason that I'm here. I want to give two thoughts, and then I want to give two action steps as we close. First one is this. My guess is that most of you that are here in this room, you're Christians. But if you're not a Christian, or if you're not sure, or it's just like I say this all the time, there's a lot of really big things to believe in the Christian narrative. There's a lot of miraculous stuff that I can't get my head around. So if you're not a Christian yet, you're not sure, You're not sure if you're a Jesus person, or maybe you feel like you used to be. You saw some things that made your faith wobble a little bit. I just want to say this. You are, hopefully this is encouraging to you. By nature of what Jesus said, you are and you were, you still are today Jesus' top priority. He came to seek and save anybody who in any way and any time in their life is away from God. It's the Garden of Eden story. Adam and Eve messed the whole thing up. And what do we see? They're hiding, and God comes looking for them. That's the gospel story. That's the story of Christmas that we're going to talk about soon. He's looking for you. Not to condemn you, not to judge you. Just say, welcome home. Welcome home. You're one of mine. I want to be in relationship. If you're a follower of Jesus, I just want to say that the heart of the Father, seek and save the lost, the heart of Jesus, it should be the heart of the kids. It should be the heart of the children. I don't know why. I think this is kind of funny. Maybe not. But I've been a pastor almost 25 years, and I have almost no empathy. Like sometimes I'm like, God, what were you doing? Like you knew you were calling me to be a pastor, and I don't naturally care about most things. Like what were you thinking? Like it's just comical to me. But here's what I've seen. I've seen God shape my heart over the years. And there are so many people and situations that I care about. And I'm telling you, I believe in a profound way that prayer leads to care. It is almost impossible to pray consistently for someone or someone's and your heart not soften towards them. And so when I pray for people by name, like we're all there, right? There are people that are frustrating. Some of them are in your family. Some of them work in the cubicle next to you. Some of them are on your soccer team or your football team. We've got it, right? But it's amazing what transpires in our hearts. That prayer starts to lead to care when you start to pray for people. When you start to care for people. So I want to give you just two really practical things. I want to encourage you to start to pray for your communities. First thing is this, you heard Patrick mention earlier on Saturday. We're doing this several times in December and January. I just feel really burdened about this. We're going to pray for our communities. I don't want our communities just to be people that we drive by. I want us to pray for them. Your neighborhoods, the neighborhoods around this church. And when you start to pray for them, something will start to transpire in your hearts. You'll start to care for them. And we just want to say, welcome home. Welcome home. You may not believe the same thing, behave the same way. We hope one day you believe this. But you're welcome here. We're going to pray for you, pray for our neighborhood. So I want you to come out to one of these events. We're going to develop community. There's something that happens when you pray together with other people too that's powerful. And the second thing is this. Not only do I want you to come to one of these events that we do in December and January, meet people that are a part of your church, pray together, invite people, say welcome home, to be a part of who God has called them to be and what God, so they can see themselves how God sees them. But the second one is I want you to pray for 3 individuals in your life. I want you to write their names down. You don't have to show anybody else. Maybe pray for a family member, pray for a coworker or a classmate if you're in school, and pray for a neighbor. It might mean you got to get the name of the neighbor. Sometimes I just go straight in the house. I'm like, I've done a lot with people all week long. I go straight in. Maybe you got to get the names of some neighbors. But just pray for 3 people by name, and I want you to pray for them specifically. And you say, you may not know. Maybe they're a Christian. Maybe they're not. Maybe you just don't know. That's okay. Just pray for them that they will encounter God, that they will encounter God in a profound way. And here's what I know. When you're praying for them to encounter God, my guess is you're probably going to encounter Him. I don't know why God works that way, but so many times in my life that happens. So I want you to come to one of these things. Don't just attend church. Let's be the church. And then I want you to pray for some of those people in your life and watch what God might do in your heart towards those people. I've asked the band if they'll close with a song. It's going to be celebration. It's going to be reflection at the same time. But I want to ask you just one question that I'm going to pray for us. Is it possible that as you're here today, you're lost and you don't even know it? I think sometimes I've gotten lost in my religious activity, my routines, checked the box, church, gave a little bit, did the thing. But man, what about you and God? How's that going? I think it's so easy to be away from God, not even know it. And he's looking for you, not to condemn you, but to love you. Maybe it's just been a while since you felt like there was anything of intimacy with you and God. In this song, here's what I would encourage you. If you say, maybe you say, hey, Chris, I'm lost, and I know I am. As you're talking about this, I'm like Zach, yes, I would know that I have no relationship with God. In this song, I want to encourage you. If any of that describes you, just say a simple, whisper a prayer in your mind to God. Say, Jesus, I believe you are who you say. And I want to be in relationship with you. I want to be a son. I want to be a daughter. And just sit with that. Father, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for loving us. Thank you that your purpose statement over your life is a purpose statement over our lives. God, help us to be a church that says to every person, welcome home. Help us to be individuals that get out of our comfort zone and say to people, welcome home. And God, I pray as a result, you would do something beautiful in our lives and our communities. We ask all this in the precious and powerful name of Jesus. Amen. Will you stand and sing with us?